Cape Coral is really the story of two brothers, one an aggressive and often abrasive dynamo, and the other a suave and charming conciliator. Both of these men had experienced incredible hardships and eventually spectacular success. The Rosens were motivated by a belief that you didn't have to be a millionaire to live like one. And from the beginning, Cape Coral was designed to offer people of modest means an opportunity to live the good life in the Sunshine State. There it is, Mr. Rosen. They call it Redfish Point. Nothing there but mangroves and raccoons.
I see a city, a water wonderland. I don't care what it looks like now. Give me 1 year. Just give me 1 year. Hey, Jack, you got any change on you? Give me some. There, that does it. I left our money as a calling card. Now we have to come back. And when we do, Redfish Point, it'll never be the same.
That's pretty much the way it began. Two brothers with brains, guts, and a lot of confidence set off on an adventure that would affect the lives of thousands of people and forever change the business of land development in Florida. There was a lot happening at Redfish Point that spring. Leonard Rosen had kept his promise to return and begin what was to become the largest construction project in the country at that time. In January of 1958, advertisements for Cape Coral had already begun to saturate selected areas of the United States. And almost immediately, cars began streaming down Harney Point Road. Now they had to get to work and build a city. Thomas Weber was a 48-year-old engineer that Leonard Rosen first met in Fort Myers in the autumn of 1957. He knew of Weber's reputation and ability to complete challenging construction projects worldwide and in all types of climate and terrain. Rosen asked him to visit Redfish Point. After the visit, Rosen used his powers of persuasion and convinced Weber to accept the job of chief engineer of the project.
When we started Cape Coral, Leonard had crippling arthritis, and he went to Florida to relax and get back to himself. He went through a terrible bout with this arthritis. And in Florida, he met a man named Milt Mendelsohn. And Mendelsohn was the originator, and he started a development called Harbor Heights, which is not too far from Cape Coral. But he got very friendly with Leonard, and he took Leonard, showed him all the things that he knew, and Leonard also knew a man from Lehigh Acres. His name was Lee Ratner, out of Chicago. Lee developed Lehigh Acres, sold Lehigh Acres, spent a lot of time with Leonard, and apparently this set Leonard off. It started something ticking within him. And he at times told me, he says, this is after he purchased 2,200 acres, which was the southernmost point of Cape Coral. And he said, we're going to outdo Ratner, we're going to outdo Mendelsohn, we're going to build the greatest city here in Southwest Florida that's ever been done. And he says, we can do it. And he really believed we could do it. And we started putting together a team. We were down there at Cape Coral, Redfish Point. We had probably a half a dozen people, which was the beginning of our team. And Leonard is up on this piece of equipment, and he's saying, right on this spot, we're going to build a fantastic city, far greater than anyone ever imagined. And I said, Leonard, you're going to break your neck if you don't get off that piece of equipment. I remember that to the day.
In the beginning, there was only one building in Cape Coral, a fourplex at the corner of Coronado and Cape Coral Parkway. The small rooms served as offices during the daytime, and at night it served as living quarters for Kenneth Schwartz, general manager of the development. In March of 1958, there wasn't much to show customers who visited Cape Coral. About 4 miles of waterways had been dredged, and the yacht basin would soon be completed. But right now, a couple of dirt roads and lots of bulldozers were the only attractions. The first salespeople believed in the project. They believed in the Rosens. And when they spoke to the customers who visited Cape Coral in those early days, they described a vision of a waterfront wonderland that they knew with certainty this would become. Only right now, it was a challenge just to get around, with only 2 main roads in the entire development and an army of construction workers and heavy equipment making for a dangerous environment. The salespeople depended on a fleet of small airplanes to fly the customers around. They took off and landed on Cape Coral Parkway. Security guards would halt traffic at either end of the road during takeoffs and landings.
My family moved to Fort Myers in 1950-51. I was 10 years old. We ended up coming to Fort Myers because the Philadelphia Athletics, my grandfather's baseball team, used to train in Fort Myers back in the 20s and 30s, and Mother and Dad just loved it. So we moved there in 1950-51. I was 10. Cape Coral got its start probably when I was 16 or 17 years old. My brother Dennis and I worked in Cape Coral on the surveying crew in the summer of 1958, where we actually worked on putting in the first lot lines. I remember the first houses being constructed in Cape Coral down near where the yacht basin is today. In fact, I worked in putting the seawall in down around the yacht basin. So I was probably 16 or 17 years old at that time, and little did I know what a role Cape Coral would play in my life in the future. But that's my first exposure to Cape Coral.
Leonard Rosen was a man of incredible character and intelligence, and he recognized these traits in others. Late in 1957, he hired a 31-year-old manager of an ice cream company in Baltimore. Kenny Schwartz, a tall, good-looking, and aggressive young man, so impressed Leonard Rosen that even though he had no experience in construction, engineering, or the land business, Leonard offered him the position of general manager of the land development project in Florida.
No, I was to call him. I called him Friday. We were on the phone for an hour and a half. In those days, long-distance rates were kind of heavy, and I'm looking at my watch, and the call went on and on and on for an hour and a half, and finally he said to me, "You don't really have any background in the kind of thing we're doing. You don't have any background really in the kind of marketing that we're doing." He says, "So I don't really know if there's any reason why we should consider hiring you." And I said to him as emphatically as I could, I said, "Mr. Rosen, I understand your objections. They're all valid, but the one thing I can offer you is that there will be no indifference at any time ever. There will always be a lot of energy and a lot of power in terms of getting the job done." And somehow I think that was kind of persuasive to him, that I told him that attitude would be so important that it would offset the absence of background and history.
Well, again, there are two recollections of Cape Coral that immediately come to mind. The first one is Kenny Schwartz. Kenny he seemed like an older person to me at the time because I was probably in my teens. And I suspect that Kenny was probably in his late 20s or early 30s. But his enthusiasm about this place that was going to be built out across the river from Fort Myers was absolutely captivated my imagination and created an enormous amount of excitement. And then to be with Dad at home, we were cutting out the maps of Cape Coral, of the first 2,100 acres of Cape Coral, the different home sites and the location of the golf course and the location of the yacht club, and to have your imagination be so triggered by a couple of people, Dad and Kenny Schwartz, you know, to somehow to be able to believe that they were going to take this raw piece of rugged Florida waterfront property and create it into create this dream into reality, into a city that's thriving with thousands and thousands of people, was one of the most exciting things as a youngster that I experienced.
Shortly after hiring Kenneth Schwartz, Leonard hired Connie Mack Jr. He was the son of Connie Mack Sr., the highly respected owner of the Philadelphia Athletics baseball team. Mack Jr. inherited much of that respect and was already involved in the real estate business in Fort Myers.
Because I adored Connie Mack. He was such a gentleman. He always backed me up on everything. And I miss him a lot, even now. And he was always a pacifier, because Kenny Schwartz would get us into trouble, and then Connie Mack would get us out of it, because he had such a manner that everybody was, you know, people who had bought property and were mad about something, he would quiet them down after Kenny had got them all distressed. I came down here from Rockland County in New York, and I needed a job. And so that was at the time that they were starting to make Cape Coral. And we had a little former orange juice stand up on the corner of Pine Island Road and Old 41 in North Fort Myers. And I went there and was interviewed. And Leonard looked like an owl to me. He had big glasses that were magnified. And he wasn't very cordial on it, but he hired me anyway. And I was supposed to do correspondence. And because thousands of people were writing in and asking about Cape Coral from all over the country. And I had another man working with me. We were writing answers to letters. Thousands of letters started coming in. And another man was working with me on writing the letters, and he said, well, you have to answer every one of these letters individually. We have to have a complete thing. And of course, in 1 hour, I realized that you couldn't do that. And then I had the correspondence job, and I hired a woman that had a machine as big as a house. Some type of computer when they first started, but it had all kinds of levers and all kinds of stuff. And her name was Mary Turner. And she was very good, thank God, because I wouldn't have known how to handle the damn thing. Anyway, we answered all those letters eventually.
The Rosens may have been demanding employers, but they were also loyal, and they expected that same loyalty from their employees.
He wanted me to do something, and I didn't want to do it. And we had an argument in his office about it. And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. You're not paying me anything here. And I'm ready to quit anyway, so go ahead if you want. And when he when I went out, he said to Kenny Schwartz to keep that woman here and give her a little more money. And from then on, this is what you did with Leonard Rosen. Once that you were accepted into the group, the family, then you could do anything you wanted, you know, and you'd get anything that you wanted too. I found that out rather early, thank God.
As word of the new development spread, customers began arriving by the hundreds and were given a sales presentation at the Fourplex at Cape Coral Parkway in Coronado. There was a large color map of the development hanging on the wall, and after hearing the benefits of owning property in Cape Coral, customers were given the choice of purchasing home sites that ranged in price from $990 to $3,390. Showing the lots was another story, because most of the lots were inaccessible by automobile. The salespeople depended on the company pilots to fly the customers over the subdivision. They would drop a bag of flour out the window to mark the customer's home site.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain once again. I'm happy to report that we're now over Florida's Gulf Coast, and in just a few moments we'll be making our final ascent prior to landing.
Getting here is only the beginning of all the fun and excitement. Wait until you see what's been planned for you once you arrive at Cape Coral.
Soon, plane loads of customers began arriving. Eventually, they were put up at the newly constructed Nautilus Inn, where they were catered to like royalty. Leonard Rosen was a dynamo and a natural-born showman. And he was a genius when it came to recognizing other people's talent and potential. The value of having Connie Mack on the Rosens team cannot be overstated. His incredible dignity and charm, as well as being the son of the great baseball legend, contributed greatly to the success of the Cape Coral project.
Well, nice to see you down here.
Connie, it's wonderful to see you. Every time I see you, I think of your wonderful father.
Well, thank you, Bill. I'm sure that if he knew that his name through me is still associated with you, that he'd certainly be very happy.
Thank you. He was one of the great men. Now, you bear an important title down here in Cape Coral, Vice President.
Well, I'm Vice President in charge of public relations.
Now, just what does that mean, Connie?
Well, it means I try to meet all the people that come here and talk to them. And if they have any problems, I try to solve them for them.
You must be very proud of Cape Coral, Connie.
Oh, Bill, I certainly am, and I imagine you are too.
I just can't get over it. I remember when you and I were down here the very first day when it all began. Could you ever foresee then what's happened?
Well, I don't think so, Bill. I don't think any of us really realized how quickly this was going to develop and just how beautiful it was going to be.
It's incredible. It's just incredible. What's the future going to be?
Well, I think the future will be that we'll have probably a beautiful city here that will be known all over the world, and it'll be certainly the most beautiful city in this country.
How long will it take?
Well, I'd say 10 years from now that we'll probably have that as a city. I'd say in another 2 or 3 years, well, we'll probably be known by everybody in the United States and be known as a beautiful community.
Connie, tell me about what you've got here now.
Well, we have over a couple of hundred families living here now already, and we have now a fishing pier in operation. Of course, our restaurant, our motel are in operation. And I think one of the most interesting things, Bill, is that we have a shopping plaza that was built by the people living here. About 12 of the residents got together and invested their money. I think it's been a terrific compliment to the developers that these people think so much of the future of Cape Coral that they want to invest their own money in.
That's wonderful. I saw a yacht basin, too.
Oh, the yacht basin, yes. We'll have a yacht club up there very shortly.
And I understand a golf course is planned.
The golf course is almost completed, Phil. It'll be ready very shortly.
Just incredible, Connie. I'm very proud to be associated with you and with Cape Coral.
Orchestrated by none other than Leonard Rosen, people from Maine to Milan were hearing about this water wonderland and were anxious to visit. Many chose to stay.
We came here in 1959 for vacation. There were 4 girls, my grandfather, my mom, and my dad. I was the only one that really fell in love with it. I love the pool, I love the Nautilus Inn, and it didn't bother me that there were no people around. And my dad said we were coming, my mother said we weren't. They had an argument. Somewhere along the line they must have made up because my mom got pregnant. And we moved to Cape Coral in the summer of 1960.
A public relations firm hired by Leonard Rosen arranged for the first annual National Inboard Hydroplane Championships to be held in Cape Coral in August 1960. A crowd of 30,000 lining Dolphin Drive witnessed the setting of 7 world records. Notice the yacht club has yet to be constructed.
My capacity as a community relations director at Public Relations, I managed the yacht club for the first 4 years when it was like the focal point of the community. One of the interesting things I think is that when other developers were doing properties, they said when the population gets to be a certain amount, they'll build a yacht club and that type of amenity. But the Rosens did it the other way around. They built it first, and they invested in the yacht club. It was a $1 million structure. We opened that on June 10th of 1962. All the sales staff brought their potential land purchases through the property. It was really a brilliant facility with a swimming pool and a yacht basin and that type thing.
After their father was killed by a streetcar in Chicago when he was just 32, their mother Fanny operated a grocery store where Leonard and Jack worked, along with the rest of the family. The boys realized early on that they had a knack for selling, and soon were hiring themselves out as pitchmen on the boardwalk in Atlantic City.
Every child fantasizes how their parents met. But no child's fantasy, or at least my fantasy, could never come up to the reality of how my parents met. After my father finished with his boxing career, he became a pitchman. And I don't even know whether that vernacular exists in the 21st century. But it's when you would go to a carnival or a fair or a boardwalk and you'd open up a tripod and you'd have a single product, a medicine man. You have to look at an old Western to understand it. And they would sell this one product. And in Canada, every year, 200 years now, they have the Canadian National Exhibition. It's in Toronto, it's on Lake Ontario, and each province has their own pavilion, and there's a big speedway where all the rides are. And my father went there to open up his tripod and to sell his medicine. And make no mistake about it, his snake oil for him could cure you. And he knew every part of the anatomy. And you had to know if you were going to be a good medicine man. And my mother, who was quite gorgeous and a beautiful figure, was a model at this Canadian National Exhibition. And they met. And they did something that no couples did in 1937. They went off in my father's trailer, especially nice Jewish boys and girls. They went off together unmarried, and they traveled around the country. My father selling his snake oil, and my mother modeling. By the time they got to Texas, maybe a year and a half, 2 years later, they got married. My father was always larger than life. No one laughed as loud as my father. No one screamed as loud as my father. No one played as hard as my father. And I knew that from the very beginning. I was my father's brother's, his name was Jack. I was his number one. He never took anyone out that he didn't bring them for me to look at. And if my father drove a coupe all through the 40s and through 1951 with no back, I used to have to stand up in the back of the car with no seat in the back. My Uncle Jack was Convertible Jack. He always had fabulous cars. If my father walked around in tennis clothes or torn pants, my Uncle Jack was suave, smooth. He was a dresser. He was a cross between Tony Martin and Dean Martin.
The Rosens believed in the effectiveness of broadcast media. They had experienced its power to sell while at Charles Antel Cosmetics in Baltimore, and they used every opportunity available to promote their water wonderland to the world. Publicity was the Rosens' middle name, and Jack Rosen saw to it that Cape Coral got more than its fair share. But the genius behind most of the TV and film advertising campaigns was a man named Charles Hepner. Hepner had been with the Rosens since their days at Charles Antel Cosmetics in Baltimore. The magnitude of his creativity was demonstrated by his aggressive yet extremely intelligent approach to the marketing of Cape Coral.
We had sales offices in, I would imagine, 20, 25 different states. State of Wisconsin wouldn't let us sell our land in their state. I went to Wisconsin, I met with, I think he was the director of insurance and could be land sales, could have been land. But anyhow, his department was the department which oversaw out-of-state land sales. And he said, no, you're not going to sell because I've read about your company and some of your sales tactics, et cetera, and we're not going to give you permission, we're not going to approve your registration in the state of Wisconsin. So I said, can I meet with you tomorrow? And he said, yes. He got an appointment. I thought about it at night. I came back, I said, we're not going to sell land here, but if we had a travel company that would take people out of the state into Florida and sell them in Florida, he said, I have no jurisdiction over that. That was the beginning of a company we put together called Travel Guild of America. And we started in Wisconsin. We had these dinner parties. We'd have 100 people, 150 people at a dinner party. We go through, we could tell them about our travel club. We're in for $79. Some of the promotions we did $59 a person, but it was usually, to my recollection, $79 a person. We would fly husband and wife to Cape Coral, but we gave these people dinner. We signed them up as a member of Travel Guild of America. They gave us their check for $79 a person. Get them on a plane. I used the different charters. Load the planes, bring them down, had buses ready at the airport. And we chaperoned these people. We had to because there was a guy there at Cape Coral, Pete Petrie. And of course, we would go through all the time, the effort, the expense to get these people down. And Petrie would try to grab them as they got off the bus. So we had to have pretty strict control with these people. After the first couple of flights, we knew we had something. And then we just moved from state to state to state. And I forget how many flights, but we may have had in the early stages 20, 30 flights a month come in. And as we went on, these flights increased. We would bring a flight of people down, bring these people down, and when they went home, 80% of them had purchased a lot. Incredible. We couldn't believe it ourselves. 80% of the people bought a lot, and on a flight to sell anywhere between 4 and 8 homes was not unusual.
But not everyone was thrilled to see these bold young fellows from up north disturbing the quiet stability of their fair county and acquiring a considerable amount of influence in the bargain. There were occasional expressions of resentment and even outright animosity directed at these brash newcomers. But for the most part, the locals behaved themselves and eventually recognized the economic and political importance of this new city on the other side of the river. Homer Welch, general manager of the Lee County Electric Cooperative, was an influential business leader who was impressed with Leonard Rosen's intense determination and vivid description of the city he wanted to build on the other side of the river. At first he told Leonard Rosen that he couldn't gamble the cooperative's funds on Rosen's well-intentioned dreams. But when Rosen presented Welch with a $10,000 check to pay for extending the power lines from Pine Island Road to the construction site, Welch promised to refund the company's money if Rosen completed even half of the promised houses. A little over a year later, Welch made a special trip to Kenneth Schwartz's office in Cape Coral and returned the deposit to the company. The incident convinced Welch that Rosen was quite a promoter, a man who accomplished what he set out to do. There was no better way to witness the transformation of this city than from the air. When construction began in late 1957, the entire city of Cape Coral consisted of approximately the 2,000 acres which made up what is now generally referred to as the Yacht Club area. The land was part of the estate of Franklin Miles of Miles Laboratories and was owned by Granville W. and Catherine C. Keller, Donald and Louise Bass, and 8 other heirs. On September 28, 1959, Gulf Guarantee Land and Title Company signed an option agreement with Ogden Phipps to purchase roughly 16,000 acres of additional land. The land was used by Ogden Phipps and his friends as a private hunting preserve and stretched west from present-day Santa Barbara Boulevard to Matlacha Pass and north to Pine Island Road. That's a drag line down there. It's a crane with a huge bucket that's used to pick up dirt from the canal sites and dump it on higher ground. The progress of the development was dependent on the speed of the canal dredging. Dredging of the canals was accomplished by drag lines and hydraulic dredges. The hydraulic dredges were floating barges that pumped the dirt out as liquid solution. In the beginning, this work went on around the clock. The present-day Yacht Club area was the first section of Cape Coral to be developed. That's the Bimini Canal and the unfinished Bimini Basin. In 1961, Cape Coral Parkway had yet to reach present-day Santa Barbara Boulevard. By 1959, the yacht basin was well on its way to completion. You can see that the entire development ended at Cape Coral Parkway. The men responsible for flying the executives and customers of Gulf American around were a mix between the barnstormers of old and the thoroughly professional airline pilots of today. They were not above practical jokes, but they took their responsibilities seriously. Soon there were 6 planes making 5 flights an hour, 6 hours a day. If the Cessna was filled to capacity, that meant as many as 500 buyers a day were viewing the development. The first airstrip was at Cape Coral Parkway in Coronado. It soon moved to Southeast 47th Terrace. And in 1962 it moved to a spot just south of today's Coralwood Mall, on the west side of Del Prado, just about where St. Andrew's Church stands today.
Okay, looking down toward the east is looking down our old east-west runway back in the middle of the 60s or early 60s. We would take passengers from the airstrip in the other end of it, taxi back, take off on this runway, temporary runway to show the property, show you where your lot is that you were going to buy, we hoped. And most of you did. But today, you wouldn't believe it could be an airstrip, just solid cars. Things have really changed. In the early 60s or late 50s, 59, 60, this was built for a runway in middle of Cape Coral. It's at Coronado and 47th Terrace. This is where we hauled our people. They flew into Page Field. They'd come over here by car or bus, and we would take them flying to show them where they were going to have a lot out there, building a lot, they hoped. And that's what we used. This was our runway.
There is no suitable adjective to describe the way Leonard Rosen used marketing and the media to promote this water wonderland. I guess masterful is as good a word as any. His answer to the question of where to put Gulf American's marketing dollars was simple: everywhere. And that's exactly what he did. The Rosens spent more money marketing and promoting Cape Coral than any other developer up to that time. But the money wasn't thrown about frivolously. The people and agencies that Leonard trusted with this most important aspect of development were masters themselves at advertising and promotion.
As I look back, we had a hell of a team. It wasn't just me. I mean, it emanated from Leonard Rosen with his enthusiasm, from Jack Rosen. And then we had a team of dedicated workers, including Bernice Freiberg and Paul Van Zee and Charlie Hepner. We worked like son of a guns. We worked hard. And we mastered this business. Our chiefs, Leonard and Jack Rosen, they gave us free rein. I guess they saw they had good people. I don't know. I don't want to pat myself on the back, but they're dedicated. We dedicated ourselves to make it as good as you could. And I know that in mail order, you better say it right. You better get all the hot buttons you can. I don't know what your hot button is, so I gave you the boom, the beam, the bang, the beam. One of those might hit you.
The advertising and marketing team weren't the only creative geniuses the Rosens nurtured. To say that the Cape Coral project attracted the greatest salespeople ever assembled by one company is no exaggeration.
There was a program that we had called Flying By. Jack put this program together. I don't know who the original brain was, but I added something to the Flying By, which they never had. I offered anyone that would come down on a Flying By to look at our condominiums that if they would buy, we would give them $300 back for their flight down. Well, the people started to come down and the people started to buy. So we moved the condominiums between the Rotunda and the Flying Bys. It was very easy. And Jack thought that that was one of the best deals he's ever saw. And he wrote me sent me a telegram. Western Union, by the way, if you remember what that was. And this is the way the Western Union went. Achievement of Operation Airlift and its results sets the possibility of unusual heights on the horizon. Your inspiration, enthusiasm, and leadership will now be challenged anew. Looking at all the details of this important picture, I can only say color it melt. Signed, Jack Rosen, Vice President, Gulf American Land. Then Jack got a great idea. He said, let's give a house away on one of the big TV shows. And this was the first house that was ever given away on TV, and I presented them with their key and their deed to the house. This was a great day, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Now, if you could find out who these people are, they could tell you more stories. I don't remember who they are. I'm 82, but I don't remember that.
There's no question that the sales team the Rosens assembled was one of a kind. Most had a keen wit and were extremely resourceful.
It was a beautiful summer day in July, and we were in the old Chandler building, a sales office. The little cubicles that were called sales offices, they were just small petitions that you could see over, and you could hear everyone else talking, trying to make sales. Another fellow and I didn't have too much to do right then. We didn't have a customer. So we started to listen to one of the top salesmen there. And he had a couple from Georgia, a very religious couple that wasn't too educated. So he was putting the pressure on them to buy. And so the man says, well, I believe in you and I think everything's all right. But he said, we don't do anything unless we talk to the Lord. He said, if the Lord don't say we can buy it, we won't buy it. So this salesman, being as good as he was and as quick as he was, he reached down in his desk, he pulled out a Bible that he got out of a motel, opened it up just to any page he wanted to, put it on the desk, put his hand on the Bible, got down on his knees, and told this couple to get on their knees with him so they could all talk to the Lord. And they did. So they talked, and he read some scripture from this Bible. And it so happened he was Jewish, which was fine, but except reading this Christian Bible was a little bit funny. And he ends up all at once, why, after, say, 3 or 4 minutes of this, a clear blue sky was in existence that day. It was no rain, no nothing at that time. But out of nowhere came the loudest clap of thunder you've ever heard. It was so bad it shook the building. The salesman jumped up, closed the Bible, put his hands on these people's hands, put them together, and said, the Lord has spoken, now let's write it up. And he did. And he sold this property to those people.
It was in 1962. I saw it in the Miami Herald. They were looking for people who speak foreign languages. They want to open up offices overseas. So I went down with a 1960 Chevy to the Cape, and I met the guy in charge there by the name of Kenny Schwartz. And it was a wilderness at the time. Then he put me up on a Cessna with a pilot, and he gave me a picture of the future, which at the time I haven't believed it. But when I came down, Kenny said, you have to go tomorrow and meet the owner of this company, Jack Rosen, in Baltimore.
The Cape Coral salespeople spoke a universal language that resonated here and abroad.
We employ OPCs, outside public contact people, male and female. They were Europeans from their specific country. They were trained to recognize an American couple out on the streets of London or Rome or Paris, wherever it might be. They looked for people who wore their pants 2 inches above their shoes, had very close haircuts in the back of their neck, and had cameras swinging from their necks. Those were Americans. They would approach a European out in the street, attractive young girl or boy, and say, "Hi, are you an American tourist?" And the people would say, and they'd say, "Yes." "Are you a tourist here in London?" I'd say, "Yes." "Well, we'd like to invite you to have a tour of the Crown Jewels, or a tour of the Thames River, or some other attraction in London, and invite you to come and have a breakfast tomorrow, or a lunch, or a dinner at the Hilton Hotel in W1, which is the nicest part of London. And while you're having your meal with us, you'll meet our company, Gulf American Corporation, and we're going to tell you about opportunity to own real estate in Cape Coral, Florida."
One of the toughest fights the Rosens ever fought was over the building of the Cape Coral Bridge. At a meeting, Leonard Rosen was said to have been insulting to government agencies involved, so much so that the next day he sent 2 executives from the company running back to find the commissioners and apologize for his remarks. Eventually the state and county came around, but only after Gulf American guaranteed $100,000 in escrow to Lee County to meet any deficit and pledged that the bridge would not represent an expense to taxpayers. In time, the bridge was completed, and on March 14, 1964, it opened and was hailed as a symbol of friendship between the two communities. It cost about $1.5 million and reduced the distance between Cape Coral and Fort Myers by more than 7 miles. The bridge was toll-free the first day, and everybody from the Cape was at the dedication. The next day, a 25-cent one-way toll went into effect.
Well, one of the nice things about our museum, and it is a focal point at the museum, we have a mural depicting the Rose Garden. And to me, one of the great tragedies of Cape Coral was that this rose garden was never preserved or protected. But I know at the time it was very expensive to maintain it. They had 40,000 rose bushes there. That alone was a lot of maintenance. It was a real tragedy. A lot of the things were just destroyed. There was a replica of Mount Rushmore there, which would have been wonderful for us to have here at our museum or kept there at the Rose Garden. There were so many busts. We're very fortunate. We have the busts of the presidents and celebrities. We have most of them. There's a couple we don't have. Walton Waters was out there. That was a beautiful place. So we have saved some of the things, but wouldn't it have been nice if it had all been kept together in one place? But it wasn't meant to be, so we're very happy that at the museum we have this mural, and we can show what it was like. We have a lot of photographs, and we hope people will come and see what we have here.
The Rose Gardens were the brainchild of Jack Rosen. In 1963, he sent Bernice Freiberg to Germany to negotiate the purchase of the fountains, which later became known as Waltzing Waters. Like every promotion the Rosens produced, the Rose Gardens were created with one purpose in mind: to attract more customers. And the 40,000 rose bushes from which the gardens got their name were another major attraction. In addition to the Waltzing Waters and the rose bushes, the site featured a porpoise show, an exhibit called the Garden of Patriots that featured sculptures of famous Americans, a tropical rainforest called the Aloha Lagoon, and various other exhibits, and a gift shop. The Garden of Patriots drew more national attention than any other aspect of the park. This was the 1960s. The war in Vietnam had yet to dominate the nightly news, and John Kerry and George Bush were high school students. The high point of the Rose Garden's short existence was a visit by the quintessential patriot, Bob Hope. It occurred on February 12, 1966, and in his honor the day was named Bob Hope Day. The event was organized by the Rosens to express their appreciation to this patriotic American for his unwavering dedication to his adopted country. They presented him with a bust of himself created by Robert Burks. A copy of the bust was placed on display in the Garden of Patriots. The national exposure this celebration brought to the Rose Gardens and Cape Coral was not entirely coincidental. Eventually, the exorbitant cost to maintain the gardens became too much to justify their existence, and even though they were a major attraction for Cape Coral, they continued to lose money. And on the night of Labor Day, 1970, nearly 1,000 people saw the final show. It was the end of an era, one spectacular ride. What the Rosen brothers and that incredibly gifted team they assembled accomplished was beyond everyone's greatest expectations and wildest dreams, never again to be duplicated.
When you raise a child, you think about what you want at the end. There's the day-to-day, and then you think about the long-term goals that you have for that kid. And basically, you want the kid to be happy. You want the kid to be able to succeed in the world without you. You're not waiting for the end of days to get that big pat on the back. If your kid is happy and if your kid is successful in the world, that's the reward. And I think that my father and Uncle Jack would feel the same way about Cape Coral. I think they would say, that's as it should be. It was like our baby, and we parented it from day to day, and we had a vision, and if that vision has been realized, then that's what we want. That's good. That's our success story. Let Cape Coral continue growing, continue thriving, and let people continue wanting to live there. And that would be the best tribute.
It was a lot. I mean, you worked long hours and you worked a lot of days because when you had customers, you had to stay with them morning, noon, and night.
On the river, right across from where our home on Riverside Drive was built, we were selling 80 by 125 foot lots. Some of them were even deeper than that because of the way the land was configured. We were selling those lots originally for $5,800 per riverfront lot. The Rosen brothers established, they were aggressive, hard-hitting men, both of them, but they not only never encouraged us to overreach, but they were very firm in establishing the appropriate boundaries for honor and decency. And in the ensuing years, the values at Cape Coral have grown far beyond any dream that these irresponsible dreamers, the Rosen brothers, with their wild dreams, could ever imagine.
My brother-in-law, Sam Nahama, went to the Teaneck Armory in New Jersey. And he called me up and he says, we just bought some property in Cape Coral. He says, we bought 500 feet on the river, zoned for multi-family hotels. We paid $50,000 was the amount of the purchase. And that's when he came down. He came down here in June of '59. Gulf American built him a building, and he taught all these farmers how to sew.
You know, those of us that were here in the first part of Cape Coral's existence that are here today are still very close, and all of us have reinvested our business careers and our personal lives, and our families have continued to live in Cape Coral and to work here and try to make a difference from what our parents actually taught us. This is our roots, and I think all of us believe that the best is yet to come for this city.
The makers of this film have worked tirelessly to gather information from family members of those who helped develop this great city, flying over and showing various changes of the landmass between then and now, and to really show a perspective of how far we've come in the past 35 years. Personally, after watching this film, I gained a much better understanding about where the city has come from in the past 35 years. And I hope that as you watch this film, you'll have a better perspective as well. More importantly, that we learn from our past and have a great future for the city of Cape Coral.
I was just 8 years old living in West Virginia when my father received a telephone call from my grandfather that was already living here in Cape Coral, explaining how difficult it was to buy products, including groceries, when you had to drive 15 miles to Fort Myers on a dirt road at the time. 45 years ago, to buy a loaf of bread or a quart of milk was a 3-hour trip to Fort Myers. My grandfather and a few other families got together and built the shopping center. When we arrived in Cape Coral, there was nothing here. It was like a blank canvas with a few scratches of ideas that Jack and Leonard came up with of some future city they wanted to develop. Many of the families got together and built the first shopping center. My father opened the first grocery store, and we began to have commercial development as well as residential development. When it came time for me to quit playing and begin to go to work and build my life career, I chose the real estate business. My grandfather opened Wonderland Realty in 1960. My mother bought it from him in 1968, and I jumped into it in 1973, and that's been my main career ever since. Cape Coral is growing at an astounding rate. I'm doing what I can to ensure that that growth never detracts from the quality of life. As Cape Coral continued to grow, many things changed. Our community bank had been taken over by a national chain. I had an opportunity to bring community banking back to Cape Coral. 7 years later, we've become a huge success, covering 5 counties with 11 branches. 45 years and 140,000 people later, opportunities are still the same as they were at the beginning of Cape Coral. There hadn't been a hotel built in 20 years. Myself and a couple of friends got together and decided to build the Hampton Inn and Suites. I've really been fortunate to have been able to grow up in Cape Coral. The opportunities that were afforded to me were endless. But you know something? Nothing has changed. Today, we have even more than what we did then. The quality of life has continued to build. We've got parks for the kids, we've got schools, we've got economic opportunities that just won't stop. This really, truly is paradise. The best part about it are the people that have decided to call Cape Coral their home. I enjoy giving back to my community. My support of this documentary about the history of my city is another way of showing my appreciation for all it has given to me.